Cities across the United States are struggling to combat climate change. Heat watches are in effect for millions of Americans across the western United States this weekend. The region has been baked by triple-digit temperatures. Some areas could see the mercury rise above 120 degrees this weekend. In the Northeast, Tropical Storm Elsa is bringing heavy rain and winds to the region as it continues to churn north. Nestled between Lake Michigan and the Mississippi River Delta is Chicago, the third largest city in the country. Chicago's success has been built on its accessibility to water. However, climate change is threatening the overall structural integrity of the city. The New York Times recently explored the history of the Windy City and the foundation it was built on. Joining us now is Dan Egan. He is the author of The Death and Life of the Great Lakes and a journalist in residence at the Center for Water Policy at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee's School of Freshwater Sciences. Dan, welcome. Great to have you with us. So, loved
Thanks
your piece. I learned so much about the Windy City. Take us through the construction of Chicago and how it came to be the metropolis it is today.
Yeah, I mean, it exists because of water. It was a sag in the natural geographical divide between the Mississippi River Basin and the Great Lakes. There was no way to float a boat between those two grand basins. So it really did kind of block commerce and people from moving into the interior of the country and moving out. And Chicago fixed that back in the 1840s by digging a canal linking these two watersheds. So, you know, for thousands of years, these bodies of water have been separated, and then Chicago built a canal, putting them together, and just opened up the Midwest to all sorts of bounty and the world to the Midwest's bounty. So it was a great idea at the time, but it came with consequences, putting a city of this size in such a low-lying, swampy area. I mean, it's built on a swamp. You wouldn't know walking the streets, but there's an ancient swamp below.
And speaking of that low-lying aspect of it, I love how in your article you explain, Chicago has faced challenges that had to do with its location and logistical challenges before, basically raising the city up to almost 8 feet above sort of where it had been before to prevent the sewage from running in the streets. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, so it was a swamp, and through the middle of that swamp ran a rather indolent river. And like most cities, Chicago dumped its waste into the river, and the river flowed into the lake. The problem was that river was so close in elevation to city streets that there really wasn't enough slope or tilt to get that filth into the river. So their answer, crude but spectacular, was to jack up the city. They put sewers on the city streets. They put new streets atop those sewers, and then they hoisted buildings as much as 8 feet. So they had enough tilt. So the streets had enough tilt to carry all that waste into the Chicago River. That was one step of solving the problem. The other problem, though, was that the river still flowed into Lake Michigan, and it carried all manner of waste, human, animal, industrial, and otherwise. And Lake Michigan, where the water flowed, is the city's drinking water source. So they were following their own nest. So then they got creative again and built a bigger canal. And that canal reversed the flow of the Chicago River. So instead of going into Lake Michigan, it flows out of Lake Michigan and ultimately all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. It's quite a plumbing project.
So tell us how it is incredible. So tell us how some of this ingenuity, though, is needed now because climate change is threatening the foundation that the city was built on. Tell us what the immediate threat is.
Well, the whole system's premised on the idea that if worst comes to worst, you can always, so they reversed the river. So it flowed out of Lake Michigan into the Mississippi basin. But when big rains hit, the river gets overwhelmed and it starts spilling over its banks. And when it gets overwhelmed, it's with storm water and it's with raw sewage. So for, a century, Lake Michigan has always been there as an emergency receptacle. They can open some navigation lock gates and the river whooshes into Lake Michigan. Nobody likes doing this. I mean, the middle Lake Michigan is still the city's drinking water source, but it's a big lake. It can handle it, and water treatment can make sure that the water stays safe. What's happened recently, which is concerning, to say the least, is that Lake Michigan a year ago was so high in relation to the river, because we've had so much precipitation, that they couldn't open these gates to let the river flow into the lake, because if they opened the gates, the lake would have flowed into the river. And so that would have just exacerbated a really significant flood that happened on May 17th, 2020. It turned Lower Wacker Drive into a river. It turned the city's Riverwalk more into like a river wade or river swim. It knocked out power to the Willis Tower, the Sears Tower, all the way to the top of those tusks in the heart of downtown Chicago skyline. So yeah, it was quite a storm, and it was made much worse by the fact that Lake Michigan wasn't there to be an emergency receptacle, and it could happen again.
And so you pointed right, and so you pointed out as the area sees rising temperatures, this can happen again and more frequently, and to a greater degree. What are some of the potential solutions on the table to deal with this? Because as you said, I mean, there's a lot at stake, not just the foundations of the building, but the city's method of waste management. There's a lot at stake here. So what are some of the solutions people are discussing?
Well, they're not to any significant degree. I mean, this is kind of an emerging problem. What's happening with water levels in relation to climate change is that it's been getting wetter and wetter, and the Great Lakes region has been, the last 5 years have been collectively the wettest 5 years on record. And the 5 years prior to that, the 5-year chunk prior to that was the wettest on record. And I think the 5 years before that were the wettest on record. So every year we extend this record string of wet years, and it's been compensated largely by increased evaporation from the lake. And so it's two competing forces. There's a biologist or a hydrologist at the University of Michigan named Drew Gronwald, who's taken the lead on a lot of this research, looking at what he calls a tug of war between the lake and the sky. And usually in tug of wars, somebody wins. And in the past year, it's been precipitation. The evaporation hasn't been able to keep up, and the lake jumped in seven years 6 feet. So when you talk about ocean rising, they're talking, a foot or two, maximum 8 feet over the course of a century. This is 6 feet in 7 years. And it just kind of gives you great pause when you think what it could look like in 70 years. Now, the flip side to this is it doesn't have to go up. Right now, the water's going down. If evaporation starts winning, then the lake's going to plummet. And that presents a whole another set of problems. So it's kind of like a big city on a fickle shoreline. And what the solution to that go ahead.
I was going to say, is this an intractable problem then? Is there no solution?
I'm not prepared to say that you do this and it'll be solved. I think it's going to take a reimagining of how that river has been so manipulated. It's not really a river. It's just a kind of a three-sided pipe. And, maybe they need to make it bigger. Maybe they need to expand an already Goliath system of sewage lagoons that they've been building for decades and will continue to build through the end of this decade. But it's a flat place, and water has always lazed on it. That's why people settled it, because it was easy to push through and go from the Great Lakes, which really, by the time they built this canal, that meant you could float from New York City Harbor all the way to New Orleans, which was magical.
Amazing.
But,
right.
Chicago's in a tough spot, literally.
Dan Egan, thank you so much for joining us and telling us about your fantastic piece in the Times. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.